Can you hear me in all corners? Good, good, good. Welcome, everybody. I'm Robert Fisher, the President Emeritus of John F. Kennedy University, and it's a privilege that Nancy has asked me to host all of you for this celebration of Myron Root's life, to help work with some special friends of Myron and family members who will have some words to share with Myron, and to introduce representatives of the United States Army at the end of our personal service for a brief military service. It really is a privilege, and there's a good reason that you'll hear about for all of us being hosted at John F. Kennedy University. I'd like to thank Mac Powell, the president of the university, for offering this space, these accommodations. I'd also certainly want to introduce President Charles Glasser, who will be speaking later. There have been 7 of us as presidents of the university. A couple special guests, Lynn Higgins and Georgia Morrison, who were 2 of the 3 co-founders of the university with our first president, Harry Morrison. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's anyone else here who is from Myron's generation of leadership at the university, which means that we can tell you anything. And I'd like to introduce my wife, Ellie, who was very much a part of the university and our life during the nearly 11 years while I was president. When I told Myron that I was thrilled to be able to share with him the news that Ellie and I were celebrating our 20th anniversary in 1980. And I said, "Can you imagine being married that long?" He said, Bob, I've been married many more years than you." But he said, "You know, it took me 3 wives to get here, so maybe that counts." And that's Myron. Myron was always the upbeat, positive, fun source of energy to all of us. I'm sure, and we'll be hearing from a granddaughter and a stepson of Myron's during the course of the ceremony, but we have representatives here from all the family, and I wonder if we have 7 children and stepchildren, 13 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, Sister Lorraine. Would all of the family members here raise your hands, please? Isn't that great? Thank you all. I know you're going to hear some things that you've never heard before about someone who's been so central to your lives, and we're going to learn a lot from Amy and George. Nancy shared with me the fact that she had been at Myron's wedding to his first wife. They go back to high school. They've known each other forever. She was his first wife was a classmate of Nancy's in high school. They were at Bobby's wedding, so that Nancy and Myron have been close for some 60 years. And when you look at the family configuration, it's really quite an interesting and complex galaxy. When I asked Nancy how that all worked, and she said, well, Myron would have loved to have been Brady's bunch. But as with most families, Brady's bunch is a rare exception. And so you've all seen Myron from a variety of angles during different parts of his life. And That will make for a very interesting service. Without further ado, may I ask Amy Murray to come up, please? Amy is a granddaughter.
Hello. I'm going to try to represent all the grandkids to the best of my ability. There are a few things that remind me of my grandpa. Spam, cantaloupe flavored jelly beans, hot rod toy cars, trains, macadamia nuts, oval picture frames, excuse me, but the word goddamned, and the great litter box in the sky, to name a few. A side note on the swearing, if he felt the need to use that phrase, he would always turn to the grandbabies immediately and say, "Excuse me." As a young child, visiting a grandparent is a fun event. Grandparents don't scold you, they sneak you treats and tell you stories. So naturally, going to my grandpa's fell within those guidelines. But when visiting my grandpa, you had three options: the pool, the attic, or joining an adult conversation around the table in the family room. Option 1, the pool. Grandpa loved that pool. It didn't matter how old we got or how embarrassed we were to wear a suit at that particular moment in our lives. Grandpa would always greet us first thing with, "Hi pumpkin," or whatever your nickname was, and "Pool's ready if you guys want to swim." The water slide would be turned on, diving board ready to be bounced on, and hot tub nice and toasty. And pool water was just right. Option 2, the attic. No, this was not a punishment. As young children, Grandma would walk us down the hallway and pull down the creaky wooden attic ladder. She would neatly fold a hand towel and place it below the last step to prevent the hardwood from being scratched. And then we'd all go up to a wonderland for any child. With the flip of a light and push of a button on the fan, there was a carpeted room full of every toy imaginable. My grandpa and grandma made sure we had fake bugs, horses, Barbies, games, and any of our parents' old toys that could still be enjoyed. Now, once we were old enough, the torch was passed and we were finally allowed to pull down the ladder ourselves, place down the towel below the last step, and watch our little cousins climb up the ladder in awe. The main rule was, though, once you're up, you're up. Option 3, adult conversation. This was by far my favorite. See, my grandpa was a storyteller, and it didn't matter how many times you had heard the story. If he ever said, "Did I ever tell you about?" your answer was never yes. Even if it was the 1000th time you'd heard the story, you'd smile and tell yourself, "Tell me again, Grandpa, just one more time." My grandpa had the most soothing, raspy voice. My only regret is not recording his voice telling me stories. It could instantly put you at ease, even if he was telling you that he wrote about you in the paper, about prioritizing getting your nose pierced over other things. Yes, that happened. There are 2 stories that I want to share with you about my grandpa. The first will be the oval frame. That right there is your great-grandpa, and the story would continue. Why is this important, you ask? Well, according to my grandpa, great-grandpas are never known, never remembered, and only ever talked about in an oval frame on the wall during a family visit in the future. Well, in March of 2013, my little sister and her husband blessed my grandfather with his very own rude blood great-grandson. This was a very important moment for us in our family because as soon as my grandpa met Austin, he was able to be known and be remembered. And now up on our wall is an oval frame, not just with our grandpa in it though, but with him and his great-grandson, Austin. My second favorite story, or memory I suppose, is about Shiryuki, my Grandma Rude's Siamese cat. She was not exactly kid-friendly and had her very own seat in a chair around the family room table. She was fussy and beautiful, and if you were lucky enough, she'd let you pet her. Now, that goddamn cat would puke a bit, and I don't think my grandpa cried when she left our world to the great litter box in the sky, as he called it. He didn't talk about a rainbow bridge or going to heaven or hell. There was just that great litter box in the sky, and that goddamn cat was there. 2 weeks before my grandpa passed, I went to visit him along with my mom, dad, aunt, and cousin Paige. I took a seat next to him and held his hand gently as he squeezed it every few moments, as if we had our own language. During the middle of the visit, he used his right hand and started to pat the bed. "What are you looking for?" I asked. He looked confused and then smiled at me and said, "I'm going goddamn crazy, and you have my genes." I laughed and asked him why he would say such a thing. "Well, I keep hearing kittens, and for a second I could bet my life on it that they're around here somewhere, but they're not." To change the subject, I asked him to keep an ear out for the winning lotto numbers, to which I never received. Hearing kittens, though. Happy sound, if you ask me. It's just a funny thing to hear before you pass, don't you think? Especially when you've told your family your whole life that when it comes to our time to go, that we all just go to the great litter box in the sky. So thank you for coming and hearing a little bit about being a grandkid.
Amy, thank you so much. George Cook.
Well, I'm glad I didn't put the litter box in the sky in my speech. That was a favorite of his, though. All right, thank you, friends and family, for coming to remember this man who has one of the most unique names I've ever encountered, Myron Orton Ruud. And if you want to go back to the original Norwegian family name, of which he was very proud of his Norwegian roots, that was Myron Orton Helgerud. He was overseer of a somewhat complicated menagerie of 7 kids, stepkids, possessed a quick wit and a talent for storytelling, as Amy mentioned. He was my mother's high school sweetheart and worked for our grandparents' insurance company, where he first earned the nickname Fireball for his enthusiastic efforts at drumming up business. In honor of that alias, please enjoy the Fireball candy at the reception. In high school, he developed a passion for cars and became quite good at painting and caring for them, and had a small business doing so. It's told he was my father's best friend in college, and Myron used to say he introduced my mom to my dad, perhaps through their involvement in the Tortuga Social Club. The recipe of spirits they mixed in the bucket at Prado Dam Park remains a closely guarded secret to this day. He began to develop his skills as a photographer while editor of the college yearbook, and showed he had quite an eye and talent for the camera over the years. He also invoked the ire of the school administration when he filled in missing headshots of his classmates with that of Sarge, the campus security guard. It was a problem. He got scolded. After college, he proudly served in the Army in Germany and carried that pride for service and veterans to the end. He was also forever disdainful of living in snow, or perhaps snow itself. Or maybe that was just a Southern California in him, I'm not sure. Many years passed when we were all born, and when my father's passing brought Myron and my mom back together again. The old romance came back alive. I've been told that the moment was when he arrived in San Diego for a visit, and my mom was on her way out to perform a concert. And she said, "There's a meatloaf in the oven. There's George. Feed him." Or something to that extent. I'm not sure what he was thinking about, taking on the responsibility and oddities of another 4 kids, but brings me to another point. He was an avid collector. He liked reminders of the places he or others had traveled, and enjoyed libations, and so had an extensive collection of beer steins, shot glasses, cocktail napkins, beer mitts, or coasters, as you might know them more. As you can see in the lovely book put together by Janie, he kept a pictorial history of all his cars, of which he was very proud. And if one asked Myron what he thought paradise looked like, he would probably say Hawaii. He was so enthralled with that island paradise, he recorded every episode of the original Hawaii Five-0. Book 'em Dano. Aside from his love of storytelling, he also maintained a voluminous encyclopedic knowledge of quotes that he just liked. He had a number of Latin quotes that he would love to pull out on me if I was trying to make a specious argument. Post hoc ergo propter hoc was one of his favorites. He had bawdy Chaucer passages that I won't repeat here. And some of his others that he loved and represented him very well. Often wrong, but never in doubt. as we know. He used to tell me, eggs shall not quarrel with stones. This typically when I would injure myself doing something stupid. To my sister Lori, who loved horses, he would say, don't take collateral that eats, which is a callback to his role as a banker. It's not wise. And certainly one quote that really impacted all of our lives on a day-to-day basis, over and over and over again. Amy alluded to it a little bit with the putting the rag underneath the staircase, was leave it cleaner than you found it. He didn't want, if you came across a situation, make sure that you left a no mess for the next person. And finally, one that he started repeating over and over and over again as he got older was, things are the way they are, which is a quote from Babe. The original Babe, not Babe 2, Pig in the City. He was handy and was known as someone who could make all sorts of things to solve problems, both practical and fanciful. Lori Brown told me a tale of a small wiener dog they had who suffered from rear hip problems. So he cobbled together a portion of a wagon into a set of rear roller wheels. And the dog was still able to get around. It was quite clever. If the internet had been invented then, he would have been a YouTube sensation with that one, I'm sure. His model train sets were always quite impressive and expressed his artistic knack that I don't know that it was ever fully realized as throughout his life or necessarily acknowledged, but he had a wonderful eye and craft capability. His railroad constructions were so inviting that it was not unknown for possums to move into the tunnel features and embarrass him at particular times or shock him. Also, he was quite handy at home refurbishment. He redesigned many parts of our houses, built cabinetry, painted walls and appliances, mustard and avocado, of course, because that was the scheme at the time. And he was an avid landscaper. I learned more about pruning roses from him than anyone else. He was great at roses. He had beautiful roses. He was meticulous about his technique and all these things, sometimes infuriatingly so, but mainly because he was usually right, which was even worse. He often ascribed this characteristic to what he called the severe potty training of his upbringing. I'm not sure what that was, but I did learn the proper way to wash a car and dry a car without leaving streaks or water spots, amongst other practical methods for life's pressing issues. He did not appreciate the disorder and chaos that his kids would occasionally inflict on him, but his love for us generally overwhelmed the annoyance at the disruption to, say, a reorganized pantry, or a misfolded towel, or a dishwasher not loaded according to established, albeit mysterious protocol. But it's true, right? I'm not making this stuff up. But far and away, the most important thing that our group of extended siblings seems to agree upon is that, while there might have been minor discord about those little things, that when it came to the big things, those events and decisions and turning points in life that really matter, that he was always there for us and supported us in our passions and chosen directions. And we had some odd passions and curious directional choices. Weddings, hospital visits, what have you. He was empathetic and caring in a crisis. He was an honest counselor and never had any problem admitting his mistakes in life and teaching us what he learned from them. He did it without conditions and with love. There's one story I must convey from when he was a young father and manager of UCB Bank in Walnut Creek, because it's a lovely story. He and some other PTA dads were roped into some sort of talent show at the junior high school where they were dancing the can-can. I don't know why they were dancing the can-can. Do you know why they were dancing the can-can? I think it was probably in that time. I don't know. They were adorned in hula skirts and coffee can brassieres. And in the midst of this performance, the police burst into the show and hustled him away to the confusion of the parents and students. They took him down to the bank where the alarm is going off, and he's the only one with the key to disarm it. The police show up at the bank, and the assembled crowd is perhaps a little shocked when out of the car comes Myron in a tutu and coffee can brassiere and disabled the klaxons. He always told that story with a twinkle in his eye. He really loved that. I want to say just a final note, quick note on the hospice that we went through in the past month or so. I was advised by friends who have lived through similar situations that helping with the hospice process was incredibly challenging but rewarding in unexpected ways, and that the hospice organization was incredibly helpful. And unlike the firework battle of '82, my friends were right this time. So, thank you, friends. While terrifying and difficult at times, it enables a rare intimacy, and I'll forever be grateful that I was able to help Myron with his transition as he helped many of us through so many of our transitions and difficulties throughout our lives. So thank you, sir. Aloha.
Thank you, George. When I spoke to Nancy and Patty about the family, one of the most remarkable things to jump out and stick in my memory was the fact that Patty described herself and her two just younger siblings as adult or young adult, but George was 10 years old. And you can only imagine from what you've just heard from George what kind of human being Myron was when he became a stepfather, father to George at 10. It's quite heroic.
Wait, what are you saying about me?
What? Say that again.
What are you saying about me?
What we're saying about it. You know, Myron was the opposite of a job hopper. He stuck. He was of a different time and generation in so many ways. He was a banker for as long as his bank was viable in a world where United California banks became First Interstate banks, became Wells Fargo banks, became whatever, Wachovia banks. And then he was a Calpiner until he retired. In addition to his career at John F. Kennedy University, which we'll talk about, he really had two careers. No one from United California Bank survives who knew him well. But Daryl Skiles from Calpine is here and has offered to speak about Myron.
Well, it's nice to know that I did survive of the UCB people. Excuse me. Then there we go. Nancy asked me to say a few words about Myron and his career with Calpine Containers. My name is Daryl Skiles, and I'm going to read most of this because at my age I forget a lot. My name is Daryl Skiles, and I have had the privilege of working with Myron for 18 years at Calpine Containers. As Vice President of Sales and Operations, I retired in 2000 after 37 years with Calpine. Before joining Calpine, Myron was associated with Calpine as its banker when we changed from a co-op to a corporation. He worked closely with Calpine in setting up the various banking programs we needed. Myron joined Calpine in July 1982 and retired August 2000 as credit manager / treasurer. It was evident that retirement wasn't in his vocabulary. As he got closer to retirement age, he would often say, "Nancy married me for better or for worse, but not for lunch every day." And I don't know if you heard that or not. He was great to work with, well liked by his co-workers, and quirky in his own way. When I first met Myron, I called him Mr. Rude, and with a smirk on his face, he said, "My name is Myron. My father was Mr. Rude." Myron had many little sayings he used frequently. He often would say, "Financial statements don't pay bills, people do." And when it was time for him to issue a credit line to one of our many new customers. At meetings when when our discussions got heated, he would often say, "What part of no don't you understand?" About once a year, Myron would go through various accounts, and any account that was over 90 days, he would put them on COD. I would go running into his office and say, "Myron, what are you doing?" And he would be sitting there with a silly little smirk on his face and say, "Got your attention, didn't I?" To get his point across at one of our company meetings, before he did his presentation, he handed everyone a dollar bill and said, "This is cash and we love it." Later, he complained that he didn't get one of his dollar bills back. Most of you don't know this, but Myron was a big baseball fan. Myron and I were invited to an Oakland A's baseball game by one of our customers. About the fifth inning, Myron pointed toward third base and said to me, "See that player out there on third base? I could play this game too. I'm in better shape than he is." I said, "Myron, that's not a player, that's a third base coach." In closing, I say, Myron, it was a pleasure meeting and working with you. I have many fond memories of our time together and hope you are still watching your recordings of Y50. We will be missed by all of you who loved you. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. The next two speakers are going to speak to you about why we're here at John F. Kennedy University. And I'll make the transition by telling you about Myron as banker before I introduce Georgia Morrison, who will represent Lind and the late first president, Harry Morrison, our co-founders. President Morrison worked himself to death, literally, and dropped dead, no warning, at the age of 49 years old. In June of 1974, I was subsequently recruited and came on in October 1974. I had occasion to look very early on at the current operating budget of the university, and I see Lind blanching. Lind was in charge of all finance as our vice president for administration. The budget was in many ways the typical budget of a very sick nonprofit organization. The Regents in May, on President Morrison's recommendation, had adopted a budget that showed $300,000 of earned income projected for the next year, with $450,000 of expenses for the next year. The $150,000 difference to be made up by contributed income, donations. The best year the university had ever had in contributed income was $14,000. Not a pretty picture. Not a pretty picture. And this explains really why Myron smiled so much when I came aboard, because those were days when the regulations around banking conflicts of interest were not as rigorous as they are today. You could actually have a banker sitting on the board of one of his clients to watch his money. Myron was on the board of John F. Kennedy University, he would say jokingly, because they had a line of credit for $25,000, always tapped out at United California Bank, and he was there from the bank to keep an eye on that $25,000 and be sure that we were on top of our repayments, because it would embarrass him so greatly if there were a default. When we raised $600,000 or $800,000 in the next few months, Myron really started smiling. He was part of the effort to raise that money, as were the other Regent leaders at the time. And we survived, and here we are today with an institution that Myron took great pride in over his 30 years more of Regency. And with that, I'll ask Georgia Morrison. Please come forward.
Nancy, and can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Better? But I always do that wrong. Okay, thanks. Nancy and family and friends, we wouldn't be here today at this beautiful facility of John F. Kennedy University celebrating the 50th anniversary of John F. Kennedy University if it weren't for Myron Rood and a few others like him who, when the university was in its infancy in Martinez, they put their arms around it and helped it grow and helped build it. And I want you to know that I will be forever grateful to Myron for his dedication, his wisdom, and support of the university in its earliest years as it struggled to make its place. He brought his expertise in accounting and budget, of course. At that time, he was Vice President Loan Officer of the United California Bank and had a degree in accounting. Very shortly after he became regent, he was elected to the corporation as treasurer of the Board of Regents. As those of you knew him well, he would, as you would expect, go over our very stretched finances in detail, looking for possible savings, sometimes making suggestions about the format and looking for ways to increase the income. Much later in 1974, the Regents elected him chairman of the Regent Executive Committee. This was a critical time, for my husband Harry had suddenly passed away, and Myron was there as chairman of the Executive Committee to help in the transition with a new president, Robert Fisher, and help in stabilizing the university at this critical time. So with Myron, it went way beyond finances and budgets. We counted on his common sense, good advice, and wit. Harry and Myron became very good friends, and Harry would call Myron for his opinion and advice, and sometimes they would meet for lunch. And while I'm sure there was lots of JFKU business over those lunches, I know there was also a lot of laughter. Myron's incomparable sense of humor and wit were a treasure to the Regents, staff, and all who knew him. In critical times, his strength and humor would lift our spirits, lessen our anxiety, and help us to really gain a perspective on the issue at hand. Always his sharp wit and the following laughter would bring some clarity to the issue. And for this reason, today, I still think of Myron as the one and only Mark Twain of the John F. Kennedy Board of Regents. When there was a crisis, and it seemed there were always a crisis in those early days, there was something he said at least a couple of times. It's an old saying which you may have heard before, I'm sure. I remember him saying, well, when you are up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remember that the reason you are there is to drain the swamp. I'm glad I was able to share my memories with Myron a couple months before he passed away. And there's something else that's important to say about Myron. His dedication, his commitment, his involvement in the university came from his heart. I felt that he really loved the university, its missions, and its I-can-do attitude. And he really wanted to see this upstart university succeed. And I think he really enjoyed being part of it. He was elected Regent Emeritus, and in 1981, Myron was awarded the Kennedy Citation, the university's highest honor, and it reads like this: John F. Kennedy of University of Orinda, California, honors a distinguished friend, Myron O. Rood, friend, counselor, and regent of the university for more than a decade. Your commitment to the community service represented by this institution, your vision of its central role in the lives of East Bay residents, and your many efforts on its behalf exemplify the very highest ideal of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Charlie Glasser knew Myron from the olden times because he was a graduate of John F. Kennedy University who went back, completed law school, became a member of the bar, became a member of our faculty, became dean of the law school, became a regent of the university, and eventually became president of the university and served for more than a decade, 13, 14 years. His hair wasn't as gray then as it is now, but he has shared a lot of those 30 years with Myron, and I'm delighted that he's flown down from the state of Washington to speak to you today about that.
Thank you, Bob. I tell my children that my hair is black, it will always be black, and it's black today. It's just to make that point. So I met Myron Rood in 1977 when Bob Fisher, who did such a fabulous job as president of the university and carried it for a decade, decided it was a good idea if the deans of the schools should attend the board meetings, so they'd hear the discussion at the board meetings as to what was going on at the university. So at every board meeting, starting in fall of 1977, I, along with Billy Hackett, Dean of School of Management, Ron Levinson, Dean of the School of Psychology, Pascal Kaplan, Dean of the School of Consciousness Studies, we were 4 deans originally, would attend the board meetings. Well, I'm sitting there as a new dean, and there's the group around this table talking about all the issues, and I always remembered Myron because his comments were perceptive. They were always focused on effective financial management, and they were always humorous and had a quality to them that was always positive. And he was just such a gracious soul. So I saw him at all these meetings over the years, and I want his family to know this. He was just terrific. And, you know, there's that famous line from My Fair Lady, the song about why can't a woman be more like a man? Well, in a sense, with someone like Myron, it's why can't everyone be like Myron? He was positive, he was gracious, he was helpful. He always did his best, and he's always made you feel good after you spoke with him. He was a very special human being. And when I heard he passed away and got the notice from Bob, I said, I'd sure like to be there if I can. And I'm very thankful to be here to share just a moment with all of you about Myron Rood. I think he did a spectacular job for JFK University. Georgia and Lynn know all the details, as does Bob. During my era there as president, it was clear that he was just always in the background and would do everything he could all the time. No hesitation for the benefit of the university. It's people like Myron Rood who really make society better and make it work, and leaves a legacy not only to his family about all the good things that you've all experienced with him, but he leaves a legacy to the community and to the thousands of students who benefited from his work at JFK. He leaves a legacy that's very positive, that's very helpful, and very constructive for our society to proceed. So to Myron, I know he's looking down, and I know he's chuckling, and he's got some comments to make, but I say to you, Myron, thank you so much for participating in JFK University. It was a great privilege to know you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Glasser. We would not be sitting in these buildings were it not for one of the many successes of the Glasser presidency. Thank you, Charlie. I've already mentioned that I came into Myron's life for better or worse from Myron's perspective, and I think it was for better. In 1974, 40 years ago, he was glad to see me because it was a frightening time for the university. We were not accredited. We occupied an old mortuary in Martinez. My office was the old embalming room, the only presidency where if you spilled water, it would drain toward the center of the room. And Myron was there, as Linda and Georgia remember so well, counting the pennies and giving us moral support. How many have ever heard him say, "Hoofda"? Bob Fisher and his successors got frequent hoofdas as the university grew and was successful. He loved fun. He was so balanced and loyal and positive. I love what Charlie said, why can't we all be like that? I told Ellie on the way out, this would not be a sad service because you couldn't be sad around Myron. You can be sad because you won't have that kind of entertainment source at hand in the future. But think about all the times. He must have been a great banker because he really paid attention to the person in front of him. He was a banker social worker. He had a real heart. He took care of everything and everybody. He was meticulous about details. Do any of you remember him rearranging the glasses on the table? Or the silver on the table? Or unloading the dishwasher? George referred to this because that's not the way you load a dishwasher. It isn't done. Patty said that he was somewhat obsessive compulsive. George talked about his early childhood experiences. Maybe that was so. He'd line those things up. Everything had to be in his order. You can imagine what a good banker accountant he was. He adored his travels with Nancy to Europe, to Hawaii. You've heard the several references to Hawaii, but you know, he hated the beach. He spent most of his time trying to develop the most remarkable tan at the swimming pool. Do you remember, family members, what has been referred to as his infamous Fiji flame swimming suit? No wonder his father-in-law called him Fireball. And he loved his cars. He was of my generation, where a source of pride in the 40s and 50s was to be able to tell the year of every Ford and every Chevy by the grill, by the tail lights. I don't know how many of you remember that, but there was a time when the test of teenhood among men was to be able to say, that's a 51. See the tail lights? Or that's a 54. He could tell you any year, model, or make. I'm told by Nancy that one of the family myths that was probably in Myron's case real was the story of him driving in England. He was wondering why the hell everybody was driving on the wrong side of the road. And when he realized that he was in grave danger with his style of driving on the English roads, he was given the advice, go into a gas station and buy a great big L for learner. Hang it on the back of your car, and you'll be amazed at how much room people give you. Which he did. And Nancy said it worked, that it really worked. He preferred a quiet life. He enjoyed what he called tire kicking. in places like produce markets. He wasn't a buyer, he was a kicker. As George said, he loved his roses and he cared for them tenderly. He didn't have that many interests, but he would get a kick out of taking his kids and grandkids to the Hornet Military Museum. He enjoyed things military. He would go to destinations like that, to places like model railroads where cars and ships and trains were on display. When Nancy gave him a train set, he wasn't quite sure what to do with it because this was almost like a hobby. Sweetly, touchingly, and very Myronly, he created what he called his little snapshot of his life. He had models of 1940s and 50s childhood homes, a bank branch, a Calpine office at his model railroad. The world's sweetest man. He enjoyed his sweet family and these sweet things. Most of his social friends were Nancy's friends. It was, for him, mostly about Nancy's world. Nancy the pianist, Nancy the teacher, Nancy the concert maker, Nancy the rehearser, Nancy the summer camp, music camper. But he loved it. He loved Nancy and he loved being with her, even though sometimes he didn't understand the music she was playing or some of the discussions that musical friends were having, but he loved the fact that she was into it so much. It wasn't necessarily Myron's world, it was Nancy's world, and this is what gave him pleasure. You've heard about a quote from Babe already. Of all things, Babe. That's, for some of you who might not have seen it with your grandchildren or children, that's the movie about the little pig that runs around. Why would that be one of Myron's favorite movies? Well, maybe there was something very cute that touched him. Among his other favorites, Tora, 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 Nothing Like Babe. The Longest Day, Nothing Like Babe. Didn't Myron even have a stuffed pig at home called Babe?
Yeah.
I see the family members nodding. Tongue in cheek, that's Myron. His favorite actor? Was it Orson Welles? Forget about it. Was it John Barrymore? Not likely. But who's quoted in that bookmark that you've all received today? The Duke, John Wayne. And what was Myron's favorite movie? The Shootist. How many of you can remember The Shootist? I'll tell you about it. It was a cult film. It was a Dino De Laurentiis film made in the early 70s, and it was John Wayne's last film. Dino and John Wayne used their considerable leverage in Hollywood to bring a whole bunch of their friends into this movie. The frontier widow was Lauren Bacall. The good doctor was Jimmy Stewart. And so the list went on, and it was like a going away party for John Wayne. What was the story of the movie? The story of the movie was that a famous shootist, gunslinger, responsible for at least 30 deaths, and a legend in the Old West, was now in the New West. And he appears in Carson City, Nevada at the turn of the century on the day that Queen Victoria died, when there are already the first motor vehicles, the early internal combustion engines on the street in Carson City, and he's an antique. He's a relic of the past. And he goes to see an old friend, a doctor named Jimmy Stewart, and he says, "Doc, I've got this terrible pain in my back. It's killing me." And he's diagnosed with cancer. And Jimmy Stewart, when asked, says, "You got a month or 2 or 3 to live." And when John Wayne, the Duke, asks him, "Doc, what's it going to be like?" Jimmy Stewart says, "You don't really want to know. Tell me what it's going to be like." And the doctor says, "You're going to be in excruciating pain. Nobody would want to go through this." John Wayne, to comfort himself on his horse or on a buckboard, had an incredible stage device. It was a red velvet pillow with yellow fringes all around it. Do any of you know that Myron Rood had a red velvet pillow with yellow fringes all around it in recent months? Exactly the same as this pillow that appeared everywhere throughout the movie in the shootist, reminding everyone of what John Wayne was going through. John Wayne in this movie has his own basic message about his life, his values. And I didn't write it down, but I remember essentially it says, "Listen, don't touch me, don't hurt me, don't get in my way. I'm not interested in hurting you or changing you or getting in your way. Let us just be. Let us just be." And I'm sure that what appealed to Myron was, I've always been my own person. Let it just be. He was secure in his own skin. He was dedicated to the people he loved and the things that he valued. He's left a remarkable legacy in the love in this room and in this university and in everything else he touched. Now, some of you may not know that Myron had a distinguished military career. Actually, Nancy said he didn't love it. He went through the ROTC program in college at Claremont, and as soon as he got out, went into the military and spent 2 years in Germany as a second lieutenant. The most that Nancy could say about that is that with Myron's occasional temper, we should all be grateful that he was unsuccessful in starting the Third World War. But Myron was proud of that service, and we should be grateful that he served his country in that way. So we'll be concluding this service with a brief military service. We have 2 volunteers from Merced in the United States Army who will conclude this ceremony, and then all of the family, all the friends are invited to share stories and enjoy each other with the food that Nancy has arranged for everybody. Thank you. Gentlemen.
My fellow soldier and I are here today to render the final military honors to the following camera. Today's honors will consist of the Plano tabs, unfolding, refolding, and presentation of the flag. We ask those who are physically able to please stand during the Plano tabs. Current and former military service members may render the appropriate hand salute. At the completion of tabs, you may be seated for folding and presentation of the flag. Thank you. Please stand.
Thank you all very much for coming. And please enjoy the reception.